Time and time again, we see strange animals depicted on frescoes and bas-reliefs in the tombs and temples of ancient Egypt. One might think that the ancients simply didn't know how to draw realistically, or perhaps they made these creatures up altogether. But what if they didn't? What if these animals were real? If so, where did they go? Why does no one talk about them? Today, you'll find out. Where did the bears in Africa come from? What animals served as inspiration for the Sphinx? And could these creatures ever come back? Extinct animals of ancient Africa. Ancient Africa. Elephants stomp along the banks of the Nile. Cheetahs race through the savannah, and ancient lions hunt somewhere nearby. This is the world of the first humans. And yes, you could once encounter an animal called the Bubal hartebeest here. It sounds like a name from Star Wars, but no, it was real. Imagine a moose-cow hybrid, but with curved horns. This creature was well known by ancient Egyptians. It was depicted in reliefs, and its remains have been found in ancient cities. It may even have been offered to the gods. In some tombs, such as in Abbadia, archaeologists found the horns of Bubal hartebeest, which may indicate their ritual significance. The oldest image resembling a Bubal hartebeest was discovered by archaeologists in tomb number 100 at Nekhen. It's one of the earliest known murals in Egyptian history, over 5,500 years old. Among scenes of hunting and ceremonial processions, you can spot antelopes with distinctively curved horns. Almost certainly, those are bubals. If so, this would be the earliest known portrait of an extinct animal, because today, the bubals no longer exist. We've lost them. How? Why? Let's find out. The Bubal hartebeest was a subspecies of the hartebeest that lived north of the Sahara Desert. It wasn't just any antelope, but a real heavyweight among hoofed animals. It stood up to 130 centimeters tall at the shoulder and weighed around 270 kilograms. Not exactly feather light, but despite its size, it could accelerate up to 70 kilometers an hour. It had a sand-colored coat and U-shaped horns. Bubal herds comprised hundreds of individuals. They grazed in dry savannas and were well adapted to the heat. These antelopes survived the height of Egyptian civilization and thousands of years of its history. They remained a resilient species, even though they were a favorite prey of Barbary lions. But their most dangerous enemy wasn't a predator. Imagine yourself 200 years ago. You're a French soldier in Algeria. You've got a musket, and there's a herd of enormous antelopes nearby. And you think, why not take a shot? Easy prey, right? You shoot. Your friends do too. Day after day, year after year. In the 19th century, France colonized North Africa, and they simply kept shooting until there were no more bubals left. Because, well, who was going to stop them? In 1902, the last bubal was shot in Tunisia near the city of Tatouan. In 1925, the last individuals disappeared in Morocco. Thus, the northern hartebeest was wiped out by humans. We exterminated it. Nature isn't eternal. If you don't protect it, it's a goodbye forever. So what do you think? Could we have saved a creature like this today? Or was this species doomed to disappear just like the mammoths? But the northern hartebeest wasn't the only victim of time and humans. No less majestic creatures once lived in the same regions. The North African elephants. They were trained like dogs and then sent into battle. Elephant tanks, obedient to humans and turned into real weapons of ancient warfare. But now they're gone. Why and how did they go extinct? We'll explain in a minute. The North African elephant was not the same as the elephants we know today. They looked a bit different. They had similarly large ears, but a more curved back and a stockier body. The biggest difference was the height. Modern elephants can grow over 3.5 meters tall at the shoulder. These, however, were much smaller, just around 2.5 meters tall. Mini elephants, if you will. They felt at home in mountain valleys, shaded forests, marshy lowlands, and even on the edges of deserts. They easily covered long distances in search of water and fresh greenery. They managed to survive in conditions that seemed nearly unlivable. Today, it's hard to believe that just a few thousand years ago, along the banks of the Nile, in the reeds or on the slopes of the Algerian and Moroccan mountains, you can find these mini elephants. Not as big as their southern relatives, but incredibly resilient and majestic in their own way. The herds were likely matriarchal. The oldest and most experienced female led the group, with her daughters and their offspring following her. A female would give birth to one calf roughly every 5 years, so the population grew very slowly. This made them especially vulnerable to extinction. And most importantly, they were smart animals, at least no less intelligent than modern elephants. They were easily domesticated. The Egyptians knew these guys well. They drew them everywhere, on walls, on lamps, even on pottery. Ancient Egyptian art includes full scenes featuring them. They were treated like cherished companions. There's even a rare bas-relief in the tomb of Pedosiris. There, among the columns, you can see an elephant, not a mythical one, a very real creature among other animals, and it dates to the end of the 4th century BC. And finally, there's a fact that settles the matter. In Nekhen, an ancient city where people lived long before the pharaohs, archaeologists discovered a whole elephant burial site. It's over 5,000 years old. This may be one of the very first elephants in Egyptian history. It appears to have been kept at a temple, possibly as a ritual animal. Sometimes these elephants served the pharaohs as pets. Special training camps were even set up for this purpose. But here's what's both interesting and sad. These elephants were also hunted aggressively. And what was the main reason? Their tusks. Long, curved, ivory tusks were considered a real treasure, carved into expensive jewelry, amulets, and ceremonial objects. For the elite, ivory symbolized wealth and status, so demand kept growing. And so it happened that on the one hand, Egyptians adored these miracle elephants, kept them as status symbols, and tried to tame them. But on the other hand, those same animals were ruthlessly slaughtered for their tusks. Paradoxically, they destroyed what they considered precious. Let's make something clear though. For the common peasants, these mini elephants often turned into a massive problem, even a real disaster. Just imagine, on the way to one of those training camps, a herd suddenly veers off course and tramples the fields flat. One such detour is enough to leave several families on the brink of starvation, and if a herd decided to march through a village, a wall or a fence was nothing more than a flimsy obstacle on the way to water or food. It's no surprise that peasants were hostile to these giants and often preferred to kill an elephant rather than endure endless destruction. But even that was risky. After all, elephants were the pharaoh's favorites. The Egyptians also used them in warfare. They really did fight for the pharaohs. These elephants were part of the Ptolemaic dynasty's army. They were like dragons in Game of Thrones. Whichever side had the giants had the upper hand. They were trained like true warriors. Over time, stories of battle elephants spread across the world. Any commander wanted to obtain this powerful weapon. Just imagine, a massive army is moving forward. Soldiers with spears, shields, and swords, and elephants at the front. Huge, mighty, unstoppable. The enemy had no idea how to counter them. An armored elephant charging full speed into a crowd, there was no escape. Such a behemoth could break enemy ranks in seconds. The Carthaginians used these giants in their wars against Rome. According to one hypothesis, Hannibal even crossed the Alps with this exact type of elephant. It was unbelievable, but all things change. The Romans found a way to defeat them. They learned how to outmaneuver elephants and even lure them into traps. A new era began after Rome's victory. North African elephants were killed for sport. They were driven into arenas and forced to fight gladiators and predators. Though fight might be too strong a word. In panic, the elephants would simply trample their opponents. And so, over just a few centuries, the Romans exterminated thousands of elephants. By the 4th century AD, the species went extinct, for good. And no other species of elephant ever settled in the region again. But that's not all. Other heavyweights once roamed in the northern parts of Africa. They didn't have tusks, but possessed incredible power. These were Aurochs. They weighed up to 1,500 kilograms and were nearly 180 centimeters tall. Males were black with a white stripe along the spine, while females and young were reddish in color. Aurochs had massive long horns, pointed forward and slightly upward, curving outward and inward, sometimes almost spiraling. Their horns could be over 80 centimeters long, with about 1 meter between the ends. These animals lived in the Nile Valley on wet meadows and in savannas. They were herd animals, but only to some extent. Herds mainly consisted of females with calves, ranging from 10 to 30 individuals, sometimes more. Males often lived separately and joined the herd only during the mating season, which occurred in late summer or early autumn. And that's when the real spectacle began. Bulls would battle for the right to mate, headbutting, locking horns, and charging at each other with tremendous force. The fights could be intense, sometimes causing injuries, but usually not fatal. A female typically gave birth to 1 calf every 2 years, starting at the age of 2 to 3 years. Over their lifetime, they would have an average of 5 to 10 calves. It wasn't exactly record-breaking fertility, but the ancient Egyptians saw them as symbols of strength and power. Aurochs were resilient, fast, and aggressive. Their entire physiology was designed for intense activity, including their respiratory system. They had large nostrils, wide chests, and rapid gas exchange, just like wild American bison, and those are fierce creatures. Naturally, aurochs fell prey to different predators. In Egypt, the main threat was the Barbary lion, which we'll discuss a bit later. Predators typically targeted calves or sick individuals. A healthy adult bull could even kill an attacking lion. It took hundreds of years to domesticate aurochs, and they eventually became the ancestors of domestic cattle. Egyptians used them for agriculture and as sources of meat, milk, and leather. Even the horns were used to make ornaments. In this way, the aurochs both fed and adorned ancient Egypt. And let's not forget that modern domestic cows are direct descendants of the aurochs. By the way, aurochs didn't just live in North Africa. They also roamed Europe and Asia. In fact, in the famous Lascaux cave in France, you can find images of aurochs that are over 17,000 years old. And in Egypt, there's a scene carved directly into a stone wall, a pharaoh hunting aurochs. It's a real scene with spears, bowls, and hunters. This is Medinet Habu, the temple of one of Egypt's last great kings, Ramses III. A similar scene, this time preserved in color, can be seen on a fresco in one of the tombs. With each passing century, the human population grew while the number of aurochs declined. Hunting, deforestation, and the takeover of pastures gradually stripped them of any chance of survival. There was simply no room left for wild bulls. Little by little, they disappeared from Egypt and later from all of Africa and Europe. The last true aurochs died in Poland in 1627. But the story doesn't end there. Modern scientists dream of bringing these giants back. There are selective breeding projects underway, as well as genetic reconstruction efforts to revive the aurochs. Perhaps in the future, we'll once again see these giants grazing in the meadows. Do you think we should bring them back? There were quite a few animals that went extinct over time. Among them was the true king of North Africa, the Barbary lion. But where is it now? Let's take a closer look. This giant with a black mane reaching down to its belly dominated North Africa for centuries. It was larger and more powerful than modern lions. It stood almost 120 centimeters at the withers, measured up to 3 meters in length, and could weigh up to 270 kilograms. They lived in prides, just like modern lions. Hunting was almost exclusively done by the females, and it was fast and well coordinated. Their prey typically included gazelles and antelopes, though occasionally even giraffes fell victim. Besides hunting, the burden of reproduction also fell on the females, of course. Each litter could contain up to 4 cubs. They raised the young together, helping one another care for them. Cubs would begin joining hunts at about 1 year old, but it would still be more about learning, and by the age of 2, they became hunters in their own right. Here, the Barbary lion reigned supreme. Though there were competitors, leopards and hyenas, they generally avoided any confrontation. No wonder the Egyptians revered the Barbary lion as a sacred creature. It was depicted on frescoes, figurines, pyramid walls, and even on the personal belongings of pharaohs. There's even a hunting scene on Tutankhamun's chest, the pharaoh with a drawn bow, the lion lunging forward, all carved in wood and painted with such precision that it looks like a freeze frame from a film. A bold statement: whoever defeats the lion is the true king. This beast symbolized the pharaoh's power, and according to one theory, it was the inspiration behind the Sphinx. But not everything was so perfect. Over the course of 10 years, Amenhotep III killed 102 lions, and that's not legend, but official record. The pharaoh personally hunted these lions in the Nubian deserts. For him, it was a sign of greatness, like saying, "Look, I killed a lion. That means I rule here." His son Akhenaten reportedly surpassed him by killing 120 lions. That was some kind of pharaoh-style hype. And then the Romans came, and a very different story began. Barbary lions became the main spectacle in the Colosseum arenas. Crowds of spectators eagerly awaited the show, and they certainly got it in full. The Romans imported lions by the hundreds, wiping out entire populations to the cheers of the crowd. But they weren't captured solely for entertainment. In Europe, these animals were seen as symbols of wealth. They were kept in private collections and menageries of kings and sultans. Lions were even exchanged as diplomatic gifts between rulers. In 1235, Frederick II gifted 3 lions to Henry III, who placed them in the Tower of London. But the true nightmare began in the 18th and 19th centuries. Hunters gunned down Barbary lions for fun, using them as living targets. Afterwards, they calmly sold their pelts and teeth. After all, this was an incredibly expensive trophy for collections. The last one was killed in 1942 in Morocco. That was it. The end. Yet, although officially extinct, the DNA of these lions hasn't vanished. In the zoos of Morocco and England, there are large black-maned individuals. They carry the blood of the Barbary lion. These are their distant descendants, crossbred with common lions. Great-great-grandchildren of those very giants. And here's something interesting. Rumor has it that these ancient lions are still alive, hidden where the public has no access, behind towering fences in private collections owned by those who can afford anything, even an extinct Barbary lion. What other incredible creatures has Africa lost? Here's something unexpected. We usually associate bears with Russia, Canada, or Alaska. But what if I told you that they once lived in Africa too? Yes, it sounds unbelievable, but it's true. Just a few centuries ago, Atlas bears roamed the forests and mountains of Morocco and Algeria. They were the last bears to live anywhere in Africa. This beast was smaller than its northern relatives, but stockier. It stood up to 1.5 meters at the shoulder, measured nearly 3 meters in length, and weighed around 450 kilograms, about the size of a large horse. Its fur was dark brown with a reddish tint on the belly. The bear's most distinctive features were a short snout and relatively small claws. But if you think it lived in the desert, that's not the case. Its home was the mountain forests of Morocco and Libya. Its diet included acorns, nuts, and roots. But like any self-respecting bear, it never said no to meat. It was a solitary animal with the exception of females raising cubs. While it might have crossed paths with other large predators, such as lions, it tended to avoid direct conflict. They lived up to about 25 years. In winter, they hibernated. This was also when the female gave birth to her cubs, right in the den, usually 1 or 2 cubs per litter. Like other omnivores, these creatures ate almost anything. Their main diet consisted of nuts, roots, berries, and acorns. In the spring, after hibernation, they might also eat carrion. They also hunted small ungulates or the young of larger animals, though they weren't active predators. Now, here's a question. If this bear lived in North Africa, did Egypt know about it? In theory, yes. Although the Egyptians depicted bears in their art quite rarely, it's possible the animal entered their mythology through neighboring Libyan tribes. The most famous example is a bas-relief from the Temple of Sahur in Abusir, which depicts Syrian brown bears. As for the Atlas bear specifically, it doesn't appear in ancient Egyptian art, but Rome definitely took notice. The Colosseum showed no mercy. Lions, leopards, elephants, all of them were in the arena. So why not add bears? Romans hunted rare creatures, and the Atlas bear became yet another victim of the arena. After all, who attacks their prey more dramatically than a bear? Crowds came to watch the battle between the exotic animal and its victim, or executioner, depending on luck. Then came 19th century hunters. Shooting rare animals for sport became fashionable. The last Atlas bear was killed in 1870, and just like that, another rare creature vanished because of humanity's desire to dominate and entertain. So, have you noticed that we've only talked about extinct mammals so far? But what about others? At the very least, there were also some truly remarkable birds that no longer exist. Although their stories are even more complicated, for example, those of the Bennu heron and the Egyptian goose. Their images appear in ancient Egyptian art, but did they really exist? Or were they just the product of artists' imagination? Let's explore this in more detail. Both birds were associated with bodies of water. Most likely, they lived in the swamps and rivers of the Arabian Peninsula and existed around the same time. As for the Bennu heron, all we have is a single bone. It was discovered in the United Arab Emirates and dates back to approximately 2700 to 1800 BC. The bird was enormous. You won't believe it, but it was actually human-sized. At least, that's the current theory, and a very plausible one. It might have been a distinct species, or perhaps just an unusually large gray heron. Scientists have attempted to reconstruct its appearance based on indirect data and ancient drawings. It likely had a long, sharp beak resembling a spear, perfect for striking fish and frogs with speed and precision. Its neck muscles must have been powerful and flexible, allowing for rapid thrusts while hunting. Its neck probably folded into an S shape when in flight. Its wingspan could have reached up to 3 meters, assuming the bird truly stood as tall as a human. With such large wings, it could launch directly from the water and maneuver well, though likely only over short distances. Due to its size, it had few natural enemies. Perhaps only a crocodile might ambush a distracted bird in the water. Otherwise, the most vulnerable were its eggs and chicks, and there weren't many, typically only 3 to 5 eggs per clutch. But the most fascinating part is its connection to ancient Egyptian mythology. It's possible that this very bird inspired the Egyptians to create Bennu, the sacred bird associated with the sun and rebirth. It is believed that the Bennu was the prototype for the phoenix. The bird was linked to the gods Ra and Osiris, and was seen as a symbol of new beginnings. And what about other birds? There's another, even more mysterious candidate for extinction, the Egyptian goose. But don't confuse it with its namesake. The Egyptian goose, Alopecan aegyptiaca, that species is alive and well. Here's the deal. The existence of this exotic goose is known thanks to the Midam geese fresco. It was discovered in 1871 in the tomb of Prince Nefermat and is dated to around 2600 BC. The fresco features the following scene in intricate detail. 6 geese arranged in 2 rows of 3. The geese on the right move from left to right, while those on the left go from right to left, creating a perfect symmetry. The birds are shown in various poses, some pecking at the ground, others have their heads raised. Each goose features a unique feather pattern, painted with exceptional attention to detail. You can clearly see the textures of the feathers, the shades of their necks, legs, and beaks. Some of the geese are painted in unusual combinations of red, white, black, and green. One of them in particular has sparked debate among ornithologists because it does not match any currently known species. This suggests that the artists might have captured a bird that later went extinct. And this, by the way, is just a small fragment of the original scene. That piece was deliberately cut out back in the 19th century to be transferred to a museum. According to reconstructions, the full scene looks something like this. It appears to depict an entire narrative in which people, presumably, are hunting these geese and trying to catch them with a net. But unlike the Bennu heron, not even a single bone of the Egyptian goose has been found. This may be the only case where a species is known only through a drawing. These birds probably lived much like modern geese, in pairs or small flocks, especially outside of the breeding season. During nesting, they became aggressive, defending their territory. They nested on the ground in bushes and occasionally in tree hollows or rocky crevices. A female would lay 5 to 8 eggs, which she incubated for around 28 to 30 days. Their eggs and chicks were preyed upon by snakes, monitor lizards, jackals, and birds of prey. Adults themselves could fall victim to crocodiles or large cats. So how could these birds have gone extinct? There may have been several causes, such as climate change or shifts in their natural habitat. Perhaps they became targets of excessive hunting. But what if they didn't go extinct, just changed? Maybe their descendants still exist today but look different. Or were their images merely artistic exaggerations by ancient craftsmen? What do you think? Let us know in the comments. Besides species that have gone completely extinct, there are those teetering on the edge. One such example is the Sahara oryx, otherwise known as the Scimitar-horned oryx. For a long time, it was believed to be extinct, and for the most part, that was true. They were no longer seen in the wild, but surprise, they still exist. How is this possible? Let's find out. The Sahara oryx is a true survival expert when it comes to extreme conditions. Picture this, 50 degrees Celsius, not a drop of water in sight, and yet this antelope is calmly running through the desert. The secret lies in its white fur, which reflects sunlight. Plus, it has an incredible ability to conserve moisture. This antelope doesn't sweat at all, but the most impressive feature is its horns. They can grow up to 120 centimeters long and are sharp and curved. There's a theory that these horns inspired the unicorn myth. Just look at an oryx from the side. One horn can obscure the other, and there you have it, a real unicorn. Oryxes lived in herds of 10 to 30 individuals, sometimes up to 100 when multiple groups came together. Females gave birth to one calf per year, sometimes only every 2 years if conditions were harsh. Pregnancy lasted around 8 to 9 months. During dry seasons, the herds would migrate long distances in search of water and green pastures. Oryxes appear in ancient Egyptian frescoes, in tombs, and even temple reliefs. The Egyptians admired these animals, sometimes domesticated them, and may have even bred them. One 4,000-year-old fresco can be found in the tomb of Nuhotep II at Beni Hassan. It depicts one man feeding an oryx, holding out food while another man holds another oryx by the horns, possibly guiding or restraining it. Not as a hunter, but as a herder. It seems they kept oryxes as livestock, or at least tried to. These animals were an integral part of their daily life. In fact, they were so crucial that the entire region was once called the Oryx Nome. These graceful antelopes had existed for centuries, but by the mid-20th century, they had nearly vanished. In 2000, the species was officially declared extinct in the wild. The reasons? Changes in habitat. Also, hunting for their meat, hides, and just for sport. Yes, the oryx's greatest enemy wasn't cheetahs or hyenas, although they played a role too. It was humans. But that's not where the story ends. Fortunately, a small population of oryxes was found in captivity. Thanks to conservation efforts, they were saved. In 2016, the Sahara oryx was reintroduced into the wild. Today, they can be seen in national parks in Chad and Niger. The population now has around 1,000 individuals, and it's slowly growing. The story of the Sahara oryx gives us hope. Who knows, perhaps the Barbary lion or the Aurochs still live somewhere in private collections. What if one day scientists will rediscover them and bring them back to the wild? The chances are slim, but hope is always there. And finally, another group of remarkable animals that haven't yet gone extinct, but are on the brink of extinction. The last remaining groups of Addaxes still roam the African deserts. With long horns, wide hooves, and a coat that changes with the season, these antelopes seem to be perfectly designed for the African heat. In summer, their fur turns white to reflect the sun. In winter, it darkens. They weigh around 120 kilograms and stand just over a meter tall at the shoulder. But when it comes to speed, nature clearly missed the mark. Addaxes can run only up to 25 kilometers an hour, 3 times slower than a cheetah. Not that the Addax tries to outrun anything. Its tactic is to freeze in place, hoping to blend into the landscape. As you can imagine, this is not the best option when you're being pursued by armed poachers. Still, these animals are incredibly lucky in one regard: their ability to survive without water for weeks. Their bodies conserve moisture so efficiently that they don't even sweat, just like oryxes. Their kidneys act like filters, extracting every possible drop of water from food. And if you're an introvert, you might consider the Addax your spirit animal. Why? They rarely form large herds, usually groups of 5 to 10, or they live much of their lives alone. Addaxes stand out not only in behavior, but also in genetics. They have 29 pairs of chromosomes, almost like cattle. At the same time, their DNA shares more similarities with Gerenuk antelopes. It's a biological paradox. They look like antelopes, yet their genes hold the story of many species. Perhaps that's what helped them survive in such extreme conditions. Judging by tomb paintings dating back to 2500 BC, the ancient Egyptians knew these antelopes as well as they knew cats. And not just knew them, these people tried to domesticate them and were quite successful at it. Addaxes are shown alongside humans in many bas-reliefs. In one, people are seen herding addaxes or even dragging them by the horns, probably leading them into enclosures. And here, we see 2 stars of our video side by side, the Bubal hartebeest and the Addax. It's possible they were domesticated, fed, and even bred as a symbol of wealth. The more Addaxes you owned, the higher your status in the social hierarchy. These animals weren't just part of nature, they were part of a system. Essentially, the more Addaxes you had, the greater your prestige. Once upon a time, these antelopes roamed across the entire Sahara. But a species that had spent millions of years adapting to desert life is now on the brink of extinction. Hunting, shrinking habitats, and poaching have reduced their wild population to fewer than 500 individuals. About 600 live in reserves, and another 1,000 in private collections. Despite ongoing conservation efforts, their future remains uncertain.